Okay, so before we jump straight into the rendering of these ice particles, we're going to take just a little bit of time in these first couple of lessons to set up a relatively simple ice particle simulation. Right? And once we have this set up, then we'll have something that we can actually use for the rendering for some of these other sections that are going to be coming up here in just a little bit. So what I have set up in this scene is really just a basic simple object, and what I want to do is set up an ice particle simulation that sort of mimics the thick smoke that you would get coming out of a smokestack. So the name of this scene file is thick smoke simulate start. Right? We've already got this basic smokestack in here. So the first thing that we need to do whenever simulating any kind of ice particles is to actually set up the emitter object. Now a lot of times whenever I'm trying to simulate ice particles that are trying to come out from a larger area, I like to start with a piece of geometry to actually use as my emitter. So anything should work. Something like a grid should be just fine. So I'll drop in just a basic polygon grid, and we'll scale this down until it fits pretty nicely inside this smokestack. Alright, now with this selected, let's pull down our menu and go to the Simulate menu. Let's go to Ice, Create, and we're going to emit particles from selection. Give this just a minute. We have the point cloud that's been created for us, and what we should see now whenever we play back are some particles that are actually emitting from this grid. Alright, now you can see whenever we play this back that this plays through to about frame 100, which is this default in Softimage. But at that point it really pretty much stops. So what I'm going to do is extend this to something like 1,000 frames, so that way we can play this back and have a little bit more room to work and actually see a little bit more of a longer result of these particle simulations. Now the first thing you'll notice whenever we start to play this back is that these particles really just go on and on and on. You can see they really don't ever stop. So one of the very first things that I do whenever setting up my particle simulations is to set up some kind of a function within the ice tree that will actually let these particles die once they reach a certain distance. So let's go ahead and open up the ice tree. So I'll select my point cloud. Let's go up to View, General, and take a look inside the ice tree, or you can use a keyboard shortcut, which is Alt-9. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started in here. We'll expand this out so it's a little bit easier for you to see. Maybe just move this over. So we have our basic ice tree, and you can see that this has already set up a few things for us whenever we did the emit particles from selection. So you can see it automatically creates for us an emit from surface node, and plugged into that emit surface is the grid. So this has done quite a bit of the basic work for us. Now when it comes to actually removing particles once they reach a certain age, there's a couple of things that we need to do. What you'll find is over here in your ice tree you have quite a few different menus to choose from, and within these we have a lot of different ice tree nodes. So as opposed to just starting by randomly digging through these, one of the very first things that I try to do is take advantage of the search bar. Now, this is going to be a real time saver when it comes to finding a node that you really don't know what exactly you're looking for. So for example, I know that what I want has to do something with killing these particles once they reach a certain age. So let's see what happens whenever we type in just something like age. So now this limits the search or the display to any particles or any nodes that have the word age contained within them. So you see immediately we have delete particles at age limit. So let's drop this in, and you notice that it turns red. And this is because there's an error involved in this. We can't really delete the particles at an age limit until we set what that age limit is. So right below this you should see set age limit. Let's drop that in. And if we double click on this, you can see that we have the particles set to live for about 4 seconds. Or we could change this to some kind of a frame count if we wanted to. So to use the set particle age limit, take the execute and plug this into the execute on emit of our emit from surface. Now you'll see immediately once we connect this, our delete particles at age limit turns green, which means now we have a proper value set in here, which means now this node will work. So now this node needs to get plugged in directly into the ice tree. So we'll take the execute port, drop this onto port 2, and now this should work. Now something to keep in mind is I almost always try to leave this simulate particles node set as the last port. For most things, the port ordering doesn't matter, but for most circumstances, you're going to want to make sure that this simulate particles is the last connected port. Okay, so I'll just double click on this to collapse this. Let's rewind back to the first frame, play this back, and now you can see that these particles will actually die once they have lived for about 4 seconds. Okay, now as opposed to actually having all of these particles die off at the exact same time, it's really going to be best if we add just a little bit of randomization in here. So let's go back to the ice tree, make sure I select my point cloud, and let's actually use some randomized values to kind of randomize when these particles die. So again, using my search, let's just try random, and you can see immediately this gives us quite a few nodes to choose from that have the word random included in them. So let's start with randomize around value. I find that this is a pretty good one to start with. If we double click on this, you can see that it does give us just some really simple controls. So let's take this value and let's plug this into the age limit. Okay, so now whenever we double click on this, once we plug this in, we now have a base value and a variance. So the base value, let's set this to something like maybe 5. So now we have a 5-second lifespan, but at random, it will start to vary this by up to 2 seconds. So these particles could now live until 3 seconds or up until 7 seconds, depending on what the actual randomized function calls. So let's rewind this, play this back again. And now you can see that we get just a little bit more of a randomized die-off on these particles, something that is now a lot more natural. All right, so now that we have this really basic particle simulation set up, what we'll start to do in our next lesson is begin going in and adding some things like wind, some gravity, and some turbulence to this particle simulation just to give it a little bit more realism before we start on the rendering process.